Hello, hello. I just want to say hello while I'm making sure all of my, gotta make sure I'm gonna check my stuff here. All right, here we are. We are happening and I can now see it. So good. All right. All right. Sorry about this. It's a little bit confusing to try to do all these things at the same time. Tonight, we are talking about some really interesting stuff. So I have to say that I just got done watching a super cool presentation by the Santa Monica Mountains group over there. We've got Jeff Sikich and Beth Pratt and Seth Riley and Ranger Anna and the people from the Samo Fund. Like, such an amazing presentation. It was actually about something that we've known about for a while here in the LA area, which is the fact that our lions are sort of becoming inbred. So it was a super great presentation that talked about why that's happening, how it's happening, what the latest state of affairs is, and it was really interesting. And the reason I'm mentioning it is not only does that sort of go with what we're talking about tonight, because tonight we're talking about urban carnivores. And this is a really interesting book. And as you can see from the top, I don't know if this is mirrored or not, but it's edited by Stanley D. Garrett, Seth P.D. Riley, and Brian L. Cipher. And Dr. Seth Riley was actually one of the presenters today at on this Facebook Live. It was really interesting. So that's just how this world works, right? We're learning about urban carnivores, and if you're here, there's a good chance you were probably at that presentation. So I hope you thought it was as interesting as I thought it was. So this book is not like the other books that we have done. We're not usually talking about like hard science like this. And truly, this book could be a textbook. It probably is a textbook. I only recently discovered it, but it was actually published in 2010. So there is this is a lot of the regular basic information. There has been new information that has come out since, but these same people are the same people that are making doing the studies now and telling us about the really cool information. So we're going to learn some of that in this book. So the first thing, and I have a little slideshow because it's not that interesting looking at, me when I could be showing you some bits of the book. And so I hope that's not illegal or anything, but, part of what Taringa Ranch is trying to do is bring some of the harder science to the general public, right? People who are not going to take the time to read the latest papers, people who may not have the time to read an amazing book like this. And so hopefully some of this will be stuff you've already heard, and some of it will be new and interesting. And so I'm going to try to do a mix of telling you what's in the book and actually, sharing little bits of it. So hopefully that is okay, because this is a big issue right now. This is a big issue. And I say that for a number of reasons, but, this week we had yet another mountain lion killed on the 101 in the same general vicinity where the wildlife crossing is to be. So that matters to me. And the more education we can do, the more we can let people know why this is so important, the faster it gets funded and the more crossings there will be, because these are important and necessary for urban wildlife. So let's get to what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about urban wildlife, right? This is not wildlife in remote places. This is stuff that we're finding right here in the city. And we're talking about carnivores. And I just want to sort of clarify the idea of what a carnivore is, because I think in general, a lot of people, they generalize and they say, oh, wow, I eat meat, so therefore I'm a carnivore. And the reality is that if meat is a part of your diet, then you might be a carnivore. But carnivore is like if you're a member of the order Carnivora, right? That would make you technically a carnivore, but that doesn't mean that meat is all you eat, right? So I think what people are thinking about sometimes is an obligate carnivore, like a cat, right? A cat is an obligate carnivore. A cat cannot live on vegetable matter, whereas dogs, even though they're carnivores, they are actually omnivores who can eat a variety of things. So while we talk about this book, Urban Carnivores, you're going to hear about some animals that you're like, wow, I didn't think of that as a carnivore. And the reason it's in this book is it's, order Carnivora. But does it only eat meat to exist? No, that's not the case. In fact, trash is one of the many things that happen. Okay, so let me share my screen and share some of what's going on in this book. Okay. Okay, so I want to give credit where credit is due, and that is this amazing book was edited by Stanley D. Garrett, Seth P.D. Riley, and Brian L. Cipher. So, and I am just presenting some of the info from it for you tonight. So that's the story on that. This is what this book looks like. It is available. You can get it. If you happen to go to some of the awesome conferences or hang out in the right places, you might even find yourself getting an autograph on your copy like me. That is from Dr. Seth Riley. So this is one of the first pictures in the book, and I'm going to leave that up while I read to you one of the parts that I liked a lot, which was actually the preface. I know, right? But it's a good, it's good. Why urban carnivores? The field of urban ecology is bursting at the seams, and it does not seem necessary at this point to justify the necessity of focusing attention toward urban areas. But what is unique about carnivores in urban areas as opposed to wildlife in general? Foreman pointed out that conservationists typically focus their attention on rural or remote areas. Once for conservation accelerate, and integration of the disciplines is needed. In many ways, studying the order Carnivora encourages linkage between rural, remote, and urban areas. Some species exhibit movements that traverse the urban-rural gradient, such that policies and management of those species segmentation, conservation of native habitat, and roads are paramount, just as they are for many other wildlife species. But for others, especially those that occupy the top of the trophic pyramid, there are issues unique among wildlife species, the most important probably being the relationship between those top carnivores and humans. In the United States, cities are relatively new and largely through persecution have been devoid of wild carnivores for most of their existence. However, in recent decades, the number of larger carnivore species appearing in cities has apparently increased. This increase could be the result of efforts to conserve habitat quality and protect predators in remote and rural areas. Likewise, urban planners' emphasis on green spaces may provide opportunities for carnivores to move from rural and remote sites into the urban landscape. These points are certainly solid arguments for the study of urban carnivores, but we would argue that the most important reason for a focus on carnivora is visceral. It is undeniable that members of the carnivora elicit strong feelings in people: fascination, admiration, fear, hate, unlike any other wildlife group. Hans Kruk has suggested that our feelings toward carnivores and resulting management policies may be a manifestation of ancestral predator-prey relationships developed during a time when we were prey of the carnivora. In other words, our feelings toward carnivora were created eons ago and lie deep within each of us. This book began as a symposium at the 2006 annual conference of the Wildlife Society in Anchorage, Alaska. There was a certain irony in presenting a symposium on urban carnivores in the least populated state in the United States. During that conference, we solidified the concept of an edited volume and we began recruiting contributors. Our goal for this project was to invite researchers that have conducted long-term, extensive research on a particular carnivore species within an urban environment. We have found that rarely does all information from long-term studies get presented in journal articles. So we thought that researchers with firsthand accounts would be able to provide insight that isn't currently available in existing literature. To that end, we encourage contributors with considerable experience to go beyond the data when appropriate and share anecdotes or professional opinions that may at times be provocative or stimulating. We also welcomed the presentation of data that has not been previously published, both to give a fuller picture of the species or population studied, and because many studies represent either long-term efforts where new information is constantly generated, or they are recently completed projects. So I thought it would be good to know that part about the book, right? Like, where does it come from? The list of the contributors is long and amazing. And it's going to take me like 5 minutes to read it. So I'm going to save that for you to do later. The first chapter is on the urban ecosystem. And it's by Dr. Garrett. What is it saying? The timing of this book coincides with a landmark period in the history of humans on this earth. On one level, the current human population, estimated at more than 6 billion, and that was, gosh, 2006? So it's way more now, continues to set new daily landmarks. With each day, the human population reaches unprecedented levels. However, the landmark specifically relevant to this book, and perhaps not as well known to the general public, is that for the first time in human history, the world's population is now dominated by people living in cities rather than rural populations. Currently, an estimated 3 billion people reside in urban areas, and this will increase to 5 billion by 2030. Some of the human population growth will occur in the 24 megacities across the earth, but most of the population growth will occur in the many smaller cities. This historic transformation apparently occurred around 2008, and projections are that the worldwide population will remain dominated by urbanites as the population stabilizes for the long term. Homo sapiens can now be called an urban species, and we have entered the urban century. So there you go. There is the urban ecosystem for you. And then this chapter sort of just talks about the different parts of the urban ecosystem, right? We've got climate and water and light, noise and habitat fragmentation, biota, flora and fauna. Biotic diversity may be the highest at the urban fringe. Is that where I want to start? Oh my goodness. Oh no, that's not. I can't read all that. Am I gonna read all that? Well, let me just tell you a little bit about noise. Humans are noisy, and there is no doubt that carnivores would notice the increase in noise pollution as they move toward the city core. Urban noise may come from point sources or may have a linear pattern, like roads. It can be reflected vertically by buildings or have daily fluctuations in intensity. The noise from human activities can be substantial. Well, I could sure attest to that. One of my long-term study areas, and this is from Dr. Garrett, the Ned Brown Forest Preserve in Cook County, Illinois, is situated near O'Hare International Airport and is bordered on two sides by 6 to 8 lane interstate highways with traffic volumes averaging greater than 100,000 vehicles per day, and is bisected down the middle by a 4-lane state highway. In some parts of the park, my technicians and I have to shout despite standing next to each other to be heard above the airplanes overhead and vehicle traffic below. Although we have not formally measured it, we have noticed that background noise volumes in the park decline during evening, which is a common phenomenon, and have varied across the days as the flight patterns from O'Hare change from day to day. I have often wondered how animals that rely on sounds adjust to living in this area. Recent research from other sites suggests that at least some songbirds adjust the frequencies of their calls in response to urban background noise. The possibility exists that in addition to habitat fragmentation and road barriers, background noise may represent another challenge for wildlife in urban settings. So, and then they talk about habitat fragmentation, which is a big part of what happens here in Los Angeles, right? A noticeable characteristic of the urban ecosystem is the fragmentation of natural habitats. Our carnivore will quickly notice this pattern as they seek refuge from people and room to hunt in habitats with which they are most comfortable. Likely, they are sensitive to some degree to the distance they must travel through the urban matrix between patches. Although they may begin using patches of modified habitats when natural habitats become difficult to find. Indeed, it is possible that this feature at this point dictates more than any other whether our carnivore decides to continue into the urban ecosystem. Our carnivore may notice that small patches have fewer potential prey species than larger patches, and that urban habitat patches may have fewer native species than similar patches in rural landscapes. Despite a general relationship between urban landscapes and biotic diversity, urbanization tends to create homogenization of species across the larger landscape, which is not good. Okay, so we're gonna skip ahead here. And now, let's see what, this is the raccoon chapter, right? So people don't usually, I don't think people usually think of raccoons as being carnivores. And they're a member of the order Carnivora, but they are, you know, some of the best omnivores that I know. They are super opportunistic, right? All right. Raccoons are medium-sized carnivores. Widely distributed throughout North and Central America and found in most metropolitan areas within their range. As introductions, raccoons are also found in cities in parts of Europe and Japan. Adapted to making use of both vertical as well as horizontal space, raccoons are easily able to scale and use human structures. They are also dietary generalists, tend to be nocturnal and somewhat secretive, and appear flexible in their ability to use a variety of sites for denning and refuge, other traits that commend them to urban living. I bet you have experience with that, right? And feel free to throw any questions or comments into the chat. Their hardiness enables them to survive even severe physical impairment, such as blindness or the loss of a limb. Beyond this, their ability to manipulate objects, intelligence, relatively high fecundity, and extended parenting may allow raccoons to tolerate challenges associated with urbanization that might imperil more sensitive species. A relatively rich vocal repertoire in comparison with other procyonids accompanies olfactory capabilities that not only enhance survival, but probably mediate communication within populations in ways we still know very little about. For greater sociality than generally attributed to this solitary carnivore is perhaps already suggested by studies that demonstrate neighbor recognition, ordered social relationships, long association of mother-cub groups, philopatry, and growing evidence of non-familial spatial group associations. Underlying all this is the persona of the raccoon, which combines attractiveness and apparent amiability when young with a wild and untamable nature when grown. So there you go. So here's a picture that is in the book. And oh, there's more. This is a great picture. This is home ranges of 9 adult female raccoons, and this is in Washington, D.C. You can see how they overlap a little. I think that's really interesting. And they talk about denning and home range size. And of course, they talk about zoonoses because that's a big deal with raccoons. They can definitely, even though they're cute, they can definitely carry disease. So you want to be just a little bit careful where they're pooping. And so this is an example. They're in a fireplace chimney, right? Works the same as a tree for them until you hear the scratching. And if they, yeah, that's a wildlife services. I wonder if they were unable to get out. Usually when they can get in, they can get out again, but that is not always the case. Picture, and these are the pictures again from the book. So this is evidence of raccoons feeding on trash. Where other species might scatter the trash around, the raccoon that visited here reached into the bag and felt for the food items it wanted to remove. Obviously, the solution to this raccoon problem is to redefine it as a trash problem and provide proper storage facilities. All right, what is next? I know, right? So all this stuff I've been telling you, like somebody else thought of it first and they did such a great job. Okay, next up, one of my favorites. Let me see if I can. No. All right. So Coyote. Great picture. Oh, and by the way, about raccoons, there is if you love raccoons and you want to learn more about them, there is a super great documentary that you can find on YouTube that's called Raccoon Nation, also done by Dr. Garrett. I loved it. All right, coyotes. So just a little teaser, next week we're talking about the urban coyote study, and we're going to go through the website and look at some videos together, and it's going to be super fun and interesting. So this is Coyotes. This is by Dr. Garrett and Dr. Riley. And all right, what did I want to highlight here? I mean, in case you don't know, Dr. Garrett does a study in Chicago, and one of the most interesting parts of the study, I think, was when they found coyotes denning in the Soldier Field parking lot. So if you know Chicago and you know what arenas are like, you know that's kind of a crazy, crazy deal. And of course, that happened after this book was written. But when this book was written, they were already collaring coyotes and studying them. So yeah, so we're gonna learn all about the Cook County coyotes next week because it's so interesting. So this is the coyote, what is this one? Yeah, this is the coyote study area. And you can see where it is. You can see where downtown Chicago is. You can see how urban the area is that they're talking about. But these days you can find this map also including downtown Chicago because the coyotes are successfully living among the high rises. All right, Coyote, Chicago metropolitan area. All right, what did I want to highlight from this part of the book? All right. As evidenced by generally small home ranges and perhaps relatively high densities and survival. This is it, yeah. Coyotes are one of the most successful urban carnivores in North America, especially among the larger carnivores. However, coyotes generally use and prefer natural or remnant habitat fragments, even in highly developed areas. Although coyotes will consume anthropogenic foods, they typically represent a small portion of the diet, indicating that urban coyotes rely on non-human food items. Coyotes come into conflict with people by attacking pets, and sometimes and even people, although based on the available studies, most coyotes in urban areas show no tendency to behave aggressively towards humans. Of 260 coyotes radio tracked in the Chicago and Los Angeles area studies, to our knowledge, none exhibited aggression towards humans. And 5 from the Chicago study became nuisance animals. Summaries of coyote-human interactions do not necessarily inform us of urban coyote ecology and behavior. They provide limited information about coyote-human interactions. Conflicts may become more common overall as coyotes colonize more urban areas. Therefore, education about not feeding urban coyotes and maintaining coyotes' fear of humans, combined with safe and efficient lethal removal of habituated coyotes, will be important to minimize conflicts. So, and yeah, they mention a bunch of acknowledgements for that coyote study, including Jeff Sikich from our own National Park Service. Okay, bobcats next. What's that? Oh, before we get to look, so this is this is a map, and this is in Chicago area, and those are basically the spots on the radio collar of a collared coyote. So that's kind of, you know, what his home range looks like. And you can see it's kind of big, and he's crossing streets. Bobcats. Okay. Widespread, and so this chapter was written by Dr. Riley, Aaron E. Boydston, Kevin R. Crooks, and Lisa M. Lyron. And I hope I said their names right. I don't know if I did. Widespread across several ecosystems, bobcats are perhaps the most adaptable cat species in the Western Hemisphere. They occur throughout much of North America, from Canada into Mexico, from sea level to the mountains, and in deserts, forests, swamplands, plains, and shrublands. Although they are strict carnivores, bobcats consume a relatively broad array of animal prey. Bobcats often focus on lagomorphs or larger rodents such as cotton rats, but they can also rely on small mammals and can make significant use of ungulates in certain systems or seasons. Finally, because of their smaller size, relatively solitary nature, and reliance on natural prey, bobcats are less likely to be involved in direct conflicts with humans than larger felids such as mountain lions, or more omnivorous carnivores such as coyotes or raccoons, right? Bobcats are obligate carnivores, so they have to hunt. So they're not going to be in your garbage. Significant, well, unless you've got meat in there, you might. Significant urban impacts on bobcats can be expected, but these wild felids also have the potential to adapt to and even thrive in urban areas. While the habits of this widespread species have been studied in a number of regions and ecosystems, urban studies remain relatively few. Here, we review and report findings on bobcat behavior and ecology, primarily from our research in California, near the large and densely populated cities of Los Angeles, San Diego, and San Francisco. All right, so they've got some bobcat studies going on. And the thing, I'm going to read from the book. I'm going to read a little bit from the book, but you know, one thing that's important to talk about when we're talking about bobcats on the urban landscape is the idea of rodenticide, right? And the fact that animals like mountain lions and coyotes and bobcats, you know, they fall prey to mange when they eat rats that have been poisoned. So we need to find better solutions to our rodent issues. So I need to throw that in there. Okay, bobcats. Okay, so they're talking about bobcat mortality. They're talking about, oh yeah, I marked off the wrong part. The prevalence. Okay, so I marked off the wrong part. But anyway, the exception to high survival rates in the urban studies, and this is about mange, was during a few years in the Ventura County study when survival rates dropped precipitously because of epizootic of notoedric mange. I don't know that one as well. I only know sarcoptic. Notoedric mange has been reported in wild felids before, including in bobcats, but never before as an epizootic. Among radio-collared bobcats in Ventura, 1 animal died from mange in 2001, 9 in 2002, 11 in 2003. And I don't know the latest stats, but I do know that in the Santa Monica Mountains area, it's like 95% of the wildlife there is found to have ingested rodenticide of some kind. So that's not in this book though. Okay, the prevalence of mange mites on bobcats or on other potential carriers such as rabbits, ground squirrels, or domestic cats is unknown, so it's impossible to know at present the source of the disease. Notoedric mange, I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, is the most common ear mite in pet cats and may be more common in Southern California than in other areas. The mange epizootic may be related to humans in another way. Every bobcat that died of mange had also been exposed to anticoagulant rodenticides, extremely widespread chemicals used to control rodent populations worldwide. Overall, 90% of tested bobcats were positive for anticoagulant residues, regardless of mortality cause. However, there was a strong interaction between mange disease and anticoagulant exposure, as 18 of 19 bobcats that died with severe mange, but only 8 of 20 animals that died of other causes had at least this level of exposure. Okay, so we're gonna leave that there. We've got some more pictures, I think. So this is interesting. You know, we don't see the bobcats as much, but they are definitely out there, definitely in our areas. And if you have chickens, you might get to know that you have bobcats in your area because they really like that. But this picture is saying that that's a den site for 3 consecutive years for an adult female bobcat in Ventura County. She denned in the 1 meter space at the top between the yards behind the condominiums, and in 1 year later moved the kittens into a hollow wooden wall between the backyards. So they make use of what they find, right? And these are the pictures from the scientists. So perhaps because of their minimal negative interactions with people and pets and their tendency to stay in natural areas more than some carnivore species such as coyotes or raccoons, bobcats in urban areas have rarely generated much management concern. This has been the case even for some bobcat populations at relatively high densities. If management concerns continue to be negligible, where bobcat populations persist in and near cities, it may be easier to address conservation concerns for this species than for those where human-wildlife conflicts are more common. Because bobcats in the city depend largely on natural habitat and native prey, for bobcat populations to survive in urban landscapes, connectivity appears to be a key requirement. The California landscapes where we have studied bobcats and urbanization have generally included areas of thousands of acres of contiguous habitat, immediately adjacent to heavily developed urban areas interspersed with small parks, golf courses, and narrow stretches of habitat. In these areas, we have found relatively high densities of bobcats compared with those reported for studies in more remote locations. And we have documented bobcats using small habitat fragments and narrow corridors through development. These observations suggest that at least some individual bobcats can persist and adapt to a high degree of fragmentation. But in these same landscapes, we have found that bobcats inhabiting large open space areas tend to stay there rather than cross freeways or disperse into more fragmented areas. Where elevated freeways already cross through potential habitat, a better understanding of how to facilitate movement between the bisected areas and prevent a buildup of territories along the man-made boundary appears important to maintaining or restoring gene flow. The situation of a freeway crossing otherwise undeveloped areas is not uncommon in North America, and the patterns of bobcat movements relative to freeways found here could also exist away from cities and towns. Okay, so we'll end it there. So now we're going to move on. Hopefully this is giving you a little taste of what this book is and what's in there. It's super interesting. I am loving it, and I, could be here for a whole hour, but I'm trying not to. Just want to hit the highlights. So next up, puma concolor, mountain lion, right? This one is by Paul Beyer, Seth P.D. Riley, Raymond M. Sauvageau, and I probably pronounced that wrong, so sorry about that. So we have a big mountain lion situation going on here in Los Angeles, and we already know that, and we know that their habitat is fragmented, and we know that there are genetic problems happening because of this, right? We know this because our Park Service and others are doing a really good job of telling us and showing us and sharing that with us. And so we know exactly why we need to fund an overpass, right? We all know. All right, so we're going to read just a little bit about, I confused myself with my markers again, but we're going to read a little bit about conservation and management. Conservation of mountain lions is warranted in near urban areas for the same reasons as in more remote regions. Mountain lions are part of the evolutionary environment, potentially contributing to top-down regulations of ecosystems by structuring herbivore communities and affecting patterns of herbivory. Equally important, living with large predators is good for people because it reminds us that until recently, we were not masters of the natural world. Of North America's 3 big predators, wolves, grizzly bears, and mountain lions, in most places, only the mountain lion is present to remind us of our roles as plain citizens of the biotic community. The presence of carnivores, especially large ones, greatly enhances the sense of wildness people experience in a landscape. We need carnivores wherever people live, not just in the remotest areas, just as we need monuments, music, and art wherever we live, not just in a few cultural centers. Fortunately, mountain lions are widespread and resilient. In most areas where they still occur, conserving the species requires only tolerant human attitudes and some restraint in transforming landscapes. Mountain lions tolerate moderate levels of predator control, hunting, and road mortality, and even high human-caused mortality if the population is connected to source populations. The most endangered mountain lion population, the Florida panther, has received new genetic material to reverse serious medical and reproductive problems arising from inbreeding, but is still threatened by urbanization and habitat loss. If there is one conservation lesson to be derived from the Florida panther, it is that preventing isolation and habitat fragmentation is far cheaper and more effective than trying to reverse these trends. So this is a picture of the study areas for mountain lions, and this is Orange County, and then up in the Santa Monica area. And so next week, we are going to be talking about the urban coyote study, and we are going to be going through the website a little bit and just talking about the cool things that it has to say, because the website is really cool and the work that's coming out of there is super interesting. So please join us next week. And then the week after that, we're going to be talking to Kim Cabrera, the wonderful animal tracker. So stay tuned. We have some more really fun ideas in store. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. And we will see you again very soon. And if you liked this, please subscribe, because we need to see you here more often. So that's my story. I'll talk to you again next week.